Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Francis Fogel Story Strategist podcast. If you haven't been here yet, you're very welcome. I'm delighted to have you in the audience. Today's guest, I am nervous to have on, not least because I'm slightly starstruck, but also because there are so many things that I think we could talk about today. And I'm going to try and be very, very focused. I'm very happy to have Stewart Drew, who wears lots of hats. So I'm going to go into what those hats are in a minute on the show. And just for anyone who has not had the joy of listening to any of my podcast episodes before, I am a story strategist, as I like to say. I like to help founders and custodians of businesses in London and the Southeast to do 4 things better using storytelling. And those 4 things are to do better, more ethical marketing and sales to make more money so that they can keep their people, their employees and their customers feeling happier, feeling more engaged and being loyal, and so that they can do more in their communities and for the planet. And that sits alongside another project I have, which is a community where I help coaches, or people helpers, as I like to call them, to put themselves out there in the world with greater clarity, confidence, and joy to help people along their journeys. So that comes off the back of 20 years of meandering on my part through the worlds of art insurance, government, not-for-profit, startups, English National Opera, the world of theatre, Royal Academy of Arts. I've got an art history background. I've got a cultural theory background. And the reason why I'm listing out all of this is because when I came across Stewart Drew, I was quite taken with everything that Stewart does. So I first came across Stewart when I was at a very beautiful vineyard in Sussex called Tillingham. And my husband picked up a magazine, a very gorgeous looking magazine, which was produced by an organisation called Sussex Modern, which then sent me down a rabbit hole because Sussex Modern is an amazing aggregator. They have a physical magazine, but they're also an online aggregator of places, art, landscape, wine and accommodation places in Sussex. And it turns out that Stewart is, I'm going to get this right, Stewart, on the board. I'm not quite sure what the exact role is, but Stewart is also the chief executive of the Warr Pavilion, which I went to see recently to prepare for this conversation. And that's not all, people. Stewart is also the chair of 1066 Country, and just referring to Stewart's LinkedIn profile so I don't miss anything off, Stewart, you're also the chair of East Sussex and Brighton and Hove Music Hub, or Create Music as it's called. You're also a member of the South East London Enterprise Partnership, Team East Sussex. And then there's one other thing here, which I think you do. You're an ambassador for Locate East Sussex.
So I'm loving your introduction.
I don't, sorry, I'm going to stop
very,
waffling.
very sweet.
I just want to give people the sense of quite how busy this man is and sort of how many hats you wear, Stewart. I'm going to shut up. Over to you. I want you to know how on earth you managed to do it all. And you've been at the Delaware for a while, so maybe we can start there. How did that come about?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much for inviting me. And I could probably sit here and listen to you for an hour, Francis, talking. It's really wonderful to hear you speak. And as you say, I think our approach to things, we seem to have quite a lot in common in the way that we approach things. I guess starting at the Delaware Pavilion, I first came to the pavilion in the 90s, I think probably around 1995, when it was in rather a sorry state. I had a friend who lived in Eastbourne. I was in London at the time. I used to come and see my friend from the Museum of London, actually, who lived in Eastbourne and commuted from Eastbourne in those days to London pretty much every day. And I said to John, look, there's this amazing building down the coast. Shall we go and have a look at it and go and see what's going on? And I was just really blown away by what the pavilion's got to offer. I mean, obviously, it's a very kind of important, significant building internationally. But actually, its history and what it promotes as a piece of architecture is so much more than that. And I guess, you know, in summary, it's the kind of blueprint not only to our art centres today, so I kind of affectionately call it the mother of the South Bank, because there's a direct correlation between the Delaware Pavilion on the South Bank of the UK coast and the development through the Festival of Britain to the Royal Festival Hall and that site as it is today. But also it's kind of the blueprint for kind of audience development, audience engagement, health and well-being, entertainment for public health. It's just really extraordinary. And I don't think a lot of people know that originally, the pavilion's got some of its heritage in, of course, that kind of taking in the sea air. It's got a relationship to hospitals, to tuberculosis sanatorium, where you go to recover from tuberculosis in the kind of 20s and 30s. And originally it was funded by a loan from the Ministry of Health. So as we're all still, I think we're all still recovering from the pandemic, that kind of legacy of the pandemic on all of us, that kind of entertainment for people's well-being and for community and civic purposes just really screamed at me back in the 90s. I was very lucky enough. Again, another chance thing really happened to me, that my predecessor at the pavilion I'd worked with in London, and he was somebody who'd been involved in the Northeast with things like the Angel of the North and the Baltic at Northern Arts. And the pavilion still to this day is very difficult in order to secure funding, particularly for the architecture. It sounds like a bit of a weird thing to say. You would have thought it would be easy, but it's really not. And Alan, my predecessor, went in and helped secure the funding package for the 2005 refurbishment and the relationship with Arts Council. And so the relationship of having visited and being very inspired by it and then seeing Alan there kind of made me go, okay, I've got to be there. This is something that I've got to be involved with. I guess just one last thing is that it's a major arts centre based in a very small seaside town. And again, that is also what makes it so exciting. It's not based in Gateshead or Brighton or London or even somewhere like Southampton that are big cities. It's based in Bexhill, which has got a population of 40,000 people, and that has had a really interesting past as a town. So yeah, that's the beginnings.
We are going to meander, as Stewart and I were saying before we press record. And I'm going to go from there to talking briefly about food, because the food, and is it Delaware? Is that how you pronounce it?
I totally love this. Delaware, maybe
I try and get things right, and I'm annoyed that I did not.
No, it's very
Delaware. What did you say?
It's very difficult to get it right because technically the family name is Delaware, and there's a
Right.
direct link to the American state.
Right. Okay.
So
That's easy to remember.
And the family are still going, you know, the lineage of the family is still going, that named it. It was, thankfully, I think for us, it's worth saying that it was funded by public money, as I mentioned, local taxpayers, and the Ministry of Health, not by the Delaware lineage itself, which is helpful to us in these days where we're looking at where funding has come from in the past, which is interesting. But the Delaware thing is, again, it goes back to that Bexhill community. The Bexhill community has always called it Delaware. So why would you argue with a community that's got such ownership over the building? So
You're being very polite. It's Delaware. Let's call it what it's supposed to be, shall we? I don't know.
Well, I don't think it matters. Does it matter?
No, well, let's move on from that, because otherwise we'll be here all day just talking about that. So the food is amazing. The reason why I went down there, and very, very briefly, in fact, I won't go into too much detail, but I based a weekend adventure for my family on going down there before speaking to you. Found a crazy place called St. Benedict's, which is a bed and breakfast up the road, which is a converted Victorian house. Have you come across it?
I haven't, no.
Oh man, you're going to love it. So it's a very interesting place owned by a couple of gentlemen who refer to themselves as friends. And one of them is actually a Greek Orthodox priest and opens the door in a full black Greek Orthodox garb.
Wow.
And they've got this fabulous house, because the houses around there are really, I mean, the history of the houses in itself must be fascinating. But it's a really big, beautiful Victorian house, which they have decked out in nothing other than authentic Victorian stuff and lots of iconography. I'm just going to hold something up here in case nobody knows what I'm talking about. The only reason I've got all this stuff on the floor is because, despite being Jewish, I had a Catholic uncle from whom I inherited all this fabulous stuff.
Oh, wow.
And this sort of stuff is all over the house, and it's gorgeous. And you feel like you're in a film. Anyway, we ended up staying there because I found
this is in Bexhill.
It's not far up the road. We got a bus from, because in the spirit of trying not to drive as much as possible, definitely not. We're trying not to fly.
No.
Well, I mean, that's a whole long story as to why we don't fly anymore, but and I won't go into that. But we decided not to even drive around, so we got the train from London. It was super easy, and I've got a 6 and a 4-year-old, so some people would be put off that. They loved it, and backpacked up the hill to this B&B, and then we got the bus to the Delaware on the most beautiful day. I mean, if you are going to do adventures in the UK, you feel really smug when you do it on a weekend where there's amazing weather, because I was literally sunbathing on the beach outside the pavilion, having been to one of your beautiful exhibitions, spending way too much time in the shop and having this money, and then having this lovely lunch. And I was not expecting it, and I've posted on Instagram because it was so nice, the food, and it catered beautifully for my son who's got multiple severe life-threatening allergies. You've got a table in the restaurant dedicated to allergy friendly stuff like gluten free. And I mean, my son was on another, he was like, what? It's like Razzie friendly cookies everywhere, and I wasn't expecting that. So thank you for that.
That's a pleasure. I mean, I think again it's one of those things that I think I learned early on at the pavilion that the food is really important. I mean, it's that old cliche of a great cafe with a museum attached.
Right, exactly. If you're not interested in art, don't worry about it. Go down there anyway.
But that's the thing though. The whole idea of kind of going, well, you can have a cup of tea and look out to sea. That whole contemplating thing. And if the quality of the food, so we've got our own team. It's not franchised out or anything. It's our own team. They're local people sourcing local ingredients and making everything. So we're not bringing, maybe we'll bring some bread in, but the team will also make bread. Most of the cakes are all made fresh every day. So you've just got that complete control over it. And I've got allergies in the family too. And it's great to see that actually, on the whole, in the UK, people's awareness of allergies or celiac or whatever is becoming that much better, and it's just really good because not only are you adhering to the policies which is good, but you've got people in the kitchen that care front of house. And I
100%.
think we've tried, I would say we've tried not to be super slick with the catering operation. I'd like to say
It was
it's
pretty
really
slick to me.
accessible. You can, you can get your buggy in there with your kit. It doesn't feel
No.
pretentious if your kids are running around or you've got people with access needs in there.
I'm
It's just
embarrassed to say that my children were not only running around, but they'd been in the sea that morning. Because, of course, when you live in London, going in the sea is very exciting. And because one of them hasn't been overseas because of his allergies, we haven't traveled overseas for 6 years.
that's odd.
They
Yeah.
were having such an amazing time and then came into the restaurant without their shoes and socks on. And I was like, oh, God. So we hadn't brought the right footwear. And anyway, everyone was, as you say,
But
very
that's what you
easy
want
and
to be
very
able
nice.
to do. You're at the seaside, you want to have fish and chips, you want to have an ice cream. You don't really want, the contemporary art police or anybody looking over your shoulder going, you can't really do that. So it's trying to,
I love
it's
that.
just
I'm going to write that down. The contemporary art piece, which I completely understand is a thing, having been in that wanky world for quite a long time. Can I just move around a bit? We've talked about
yeah,
local. Can we just move on to Sussex Modern for a bit?
yeah,
Do you want to describe what it is, basically?
yeah. I mean, I think there's been a number of initiatives. We actually started out with this thing called the Coastal Cultural Trail, which is still going, which is just linking places together. So you know that if you come to the pavilion, there's an awareness that you're not going to spend all day there. You might come for the morning. Maybe if the weather's lovely, you'll go to the beach and then come back in or whatever. But it's an awareness that if somebody comes to stay, they want to do different things. And how do you very simply package that up? So we've got Hastings Contemporary, which is a really beautiful gallery in Hastings, and you've obviously got the Towner in Eastbourne. So the Coastal Cultural Trail, and it comes back to your sustainable transport. We were saying, actually, you can cycle between the three sites. It's very easy to cycle between Bexhill and Hastings along the seafront. It's very, very easy off-road on the seafront. The route to Eastbourne is slightly more challenging, depending on your level of proficiency and whether you've got family with you. There's a couple of narrow country lanes, but nonetheless, you can cycle between the three, or you can use public transport between the three. And so we packaged that up. Famously, this is the £200 marketing campaign that back in the day just would not stop producing press. The press just loved it. And this is probably like 10 or 15 years ago was the beginnings. And we just got so much out of it that in a way that thinking developed and thought, well, there's the three galleries. So as I say, we still market the three galleries together because they're a bite-sized chunk of culture across the three towns. But Sussex Modern was thinking, working with other partners, predominantly Nathaniel Hepburn at Charleston, so that the two of us were, I guess, partners in crime in the early days of kind of thinking, how can we develop this? We actually started off, and Nathaniel led that with a big exhibition in London at Two Temple Place called Sussex Modernism, which had around 55 to 60,000 visitors, which was showing work from all of the partners, from Pallant House in Chichester. You've got Farley's Farmhouse. We can whiz through the venues. Amazing list. You've got Charleston, you've got Ditchling, you've got Glyndebourne, you've got etc. etc. So we did that showcase, and then off the back of that showcase said, well, we need to market the venues together. So we started with the cultural venues as previously listed, and then looked to see how we could develop that and how we might work also with slightly the more private sector, but in a more sustainable and authentic way. And was obviously observing, predominantly the early growth of Raffini in Sussex and looking at a Mark
Which
Driver,
is a vineyard for anyone listening
yeah,
who isn't aware
which
of
is
that.
the most beautiful vineyard in Sussex. which really kind of led the way. Mark Driver's been a board member of Sussex Modern for a long time too, and working very much in partnership. And then, of course, the vineyards, as you mentioned, Tillingham and Osbrook and Charles Palmer in Rye and all the way over to Wiston in West Sussex. The real growth of that industry and how that really suited the cultural institutions and the landscape and the sustainable transport and suited that story. So we as a group, together with the South Downs National Park, have really worked hard at pulling that together.
And can I also say there's also I don't know if you're going to get onto the accommodation.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's also
yeah,
a big part of
absolutely.
it.
So yeah, starting to build both accommodation and then food partners as well on top of that. So it's well worth looking at the website. I think the other thing with it is that it's worth saying that Sussex Modern was also filling a gap and being a bit of a disruptor, because I don't think anybody else was doing that kind of thing. And also thinking very carefully about audiences. And I'm, as you said in my introduction, I'm also the chair of 1066 Country. A lot of 1066 market has traditionally been kind of there's a lot of, if you look at the bed spaces across Hastings and Bexhill, Hastings and Rotherham, Wealdon, there's a lot of caravan parks. So there's a huge number of family holidays. A lot of it, and this isn't, these are just different segments, but a lot of it is lower value tourism and is very close domestic tourism. People are coming from London, they're not coming very far. So the thought about Sussex Modern was actually saying nobody's focusing on the slightly higher end of things, higher spending visitors, higher quality offer that would attract, in the same way that the vineyards work internationally, could attract an international visitor to Sussex and could help to start to define Sussex. So that's the think. It is very much thinking about audience segmentation. And as I say, as chair of 1066, I'm very proud of what's going on there. Things are evolving with all the tourism offer at the moment. But Sussex Modern isn't core funded by any of the local authorities. It's an agile partnership of the willing to try and make things happen and to tell a different narrative.
Beautiful. I wonder if you can see my book here, Citizens by John Alexander. Have you come across that?
I haven't, no.
When's your birthday? I'll send you a copy because
Oh,
I'm
you've
trying
just
to.
missed it, unfortunately.
Oh no! Happy birthday! I'm
Thank you.
basically. I mean, I should get paid by John. The amount of times I talk about his book, I've got no there's no affiliation at all formally, other than I just think he's an absolute rock star. But his book is all about citizenship and local community coming together and doing things out of not the goodness of their heart, but from an astute strategic perspective, understanding that, and let's not shit sling at the government, things are not going to happen unless we all just get off our asses and do stuff ourselves and see who is around us locally and who, the connections. And this is why I love everything that you're involved with and everything you've talked about today, because as you say, it seems to me that you've been involved in a number of organisations that have quite obviously been real disruptors, and I think are modelling, or should be modelling, what maybe more people need to know about modern Sussex Modern. There's this kind of interesting, we also need to congratulate Nathaniel, don't we? Because he's recently been, is it knighted or what did he get? OBE, can't remember.
OBE, I think.
Yeah,
Yes.
so well done, Nathaniel. Nathaniel
Absolutely.
Hawthorne is the director of Charleston, which Hepburn, sorry.
Yeah.
And Charleston is a wonderful house in Sussex where the Bloomsbury Group would come from London. And if anyone doesn't know who the Bloomsbury Group is, the famous phrase, I'm probably going to get this wrong, is that they lived in squares, loved in triangles, and thought in circles. Is that right?
I think that's broadly right.
And I only know about them from my art insurance days, because I worked for the world's only art-led insurance company, AXA are, and we insured Charleston. And so I had the privilege of going down and seeing it from the viewpoint of how complex it was from an insurance point of view, because the artwork is embedded in the walls and in the doors. And so to think about replacing any of it is impossible. And God forbid anything happens, like they have water damage or fire. It's just, but it's the most stunning place. If you are not kind of in this wanky world of art history and wine tasting and art, as you say, the idea of bringing everybody together and doing wonderful things in the community, but using some of the assets that are typically those kind of highbrow assets, is a challenge, but also a really exciting opportunity for businesses in, let's just talk about Sussex for now, because that's what we're talking about. I want to tell you that the kind of organizations that I built my business to work with are, for example, I'll tell you a story of a kind of who I would love to work with. It's somebody who's inherited farmland or a vineyard. They are needing to pivot their business because they're not making enough money because of the state of farming in this country. And quite rightly, one could argue, they would like to do some more rewilding. They want to reduce their kind of arable land. And they're seeing the likes of these exciting glamping sites all over Canopy and Stars. And they're wanting to kind of diversify their income, bring people on the land to stay. And they can see there's opportunities in the community. And maybe they have the luxury of headspace also, or the kind of vision, because they've inherited this land from their grandparents who maybe aren't around to work on the land anymore. And they have this real excitement to kind of bring it out to the people. Can you talk about any examples that you're seeing every day of these kinds of things happening?
I mean, I think the best thing to talk about maybe is the challenges. I think since I've been involved in Sussex Modern and 1066, I'm also very much embedded within Rother District Council, in which the pavilion sits. So I have a very good relationship with that kind of wider Rother community, and try to really care for that community and the wider aspects of the pavilion. And I think what's really been interesting is being drawn in to planning meetings in the rural areas, because you've got a lot of rural farmland, as you say. And it's been really interesting. As you know, I just urge everybody to look at Sussex Modern and look at all those partners and all those amazing vineyard and cultural partners on there. But it's really interesting to see how that rural landscape is evolving and needs to evolve, because we're still working under planning rules that are very outdated. So even basic things about being able to get a modern combine harvester down the track that was built for a Massey Ferguson tractor, right the way through to, as you say, the viability of farmland, and saying, right, we're going to diversify, we're going to plant vineyards, we're going to build a small visitor attraction, those kinds of things, and the kind of really difficult conversations that have been going on. I mean, we've been working with Lake Down as well, which is a small rural brewery, actually owned by Roger Daltrey's family. But again, I think it really cheekily got a mention in one of the episodes of Clarkson's Farm. I shouldn't really admit to watching that, but it's quite interesting watching some of those dynamics, because those the way that Clarkson presents some of those challenges with his cafe on that site are done in a very Clarkson-esque type way that a lot of us particularly aren't very fond of, but actually they're a parody of actually what's going on. And I think, not only people like Daltrey that are landowners and are trying to diversify too, but saying, we want to turn this barn into a microbrewery. How can we do that? And the challenges of that. So I find that really exciting. There's a few fights going on, but you can see that things are really changing, and what's happening is very exciting. You know, you mentioned sites like Tillingham and, you
Yeah,
know, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of examples.
there are. And we were down last weekend at NEP, in case anyone doesn't know what that is. That NEP are the kind of heroes of the rewilding movement, and they have Isabella Tree has a great book called Wilding, which is such a good like introduction to the challenges and the arguments and the narrative which comes along with, you know, that this thing after the war, which was dig for victory. You know, everybody was told that they needed to turn absolutely every inch of possible farming land into arable land and just rinse the shit out of any possible opportunity to plant stuff. And then there was a massive uh what's the word, like too many, what's the word for too many, just an abundance of
Saturation.
dairy and
Yeah.
corn and just way too much. And the whole, what we understand to be the pastoral idyll that is Britain isn't what it was like 200 years ago at all. And we think of nice beautiful manicured squares with fences around them as kind of nature, and a lot of our views are having to change as to how things might be in terms of better for the planet.
It's, it's
um
about a variety, though. I mean, I think the vineyards, to a certain extent, have got to but also be careful that it's viable, you know, and they're not oversaturating their market too. You know, I know, you know, there's various challenges, isn't there, with any sector, especially as they evolve and as they're early on. And I think what's important is, to coin a colleague's phrase, a kind of rich tapestry of lots of different
yeah,
things going on that join up and provide that. You know, I think you're also alluding to, you know, placemaking, you know, sustainable placemaking is a real, you know, I have very little control over that. I try to have as much control as I can, but I think is a real fascination there and comes back to those modernist ideals that didn't always work. You know, the Newtowns, the
yeah,
Harlow Newtowns of this world, and the Milton Keynes. They didn't always work, but what they were trying to achieve was that kind of ecology and sustainability and sustainable transport and those kinds of things. I think it's really
yeah,
fascinating.
me too. And the diversity of people who live. I come from an area. Where are you from? Are you from South
I'm
London or
from I'm from West London.
West? Okay.
West.
Oh, interesting.
I'm from near Heathrow, Hounslow, Heston,
So
originally.
so I'm, my parents live in an area called Hampstead Garden Suburb. um so it's not my fault.
You've got the same influences.
Well, basically I grew up in an arts and crafts house, and
Yeah.
so I grew up with a clear understanding of who Henrietta Barnett was. And sorry about the name dropping, everyone, we're going down a rabbit hole. And Henrietta Barnett was of course married to Samuel Barnett, who was and forgive me if I get the terminology wrong, but the vicar in Whitechapel. And he opened the Whitechapel Gallery to bring art to the masses in East London. And equally, in the times of the smog, his wife Henrietta was keen to get them out of London, and Golders Green was the first London Underground station. And the idea was to build Hampstead Garden Suburb. They got their mate Lutyens, who designed Welwyn Garden City, Letchworth Garden City, and also some houses in Ealing, right? I think
Yeah,
there
I'm
are some
not.
arts and crafts houses in Ealing. I don't know if it was, yeah. Anyway,
I know Dixter is Lutyens, isn't it? Great Dixter.
oh, I don't know. I'll look up
I
that
don't
one.
know. I'm trying
But
to
anyway, the
remember.
point was, let's have like a couple of churches that are completely different. So you've got the Free Church, and then you've got like a higher church. And forgive me, I don't really understand churches. You know, because I'm not Christian, but there's a couple of churches. There's artisan houses, what were artisan houses. There's rich people houses. There's a free school. And the idea was to kind of have everyone living all together, that it's now listed. You know, you can't have it, it's all divided by hedges, and you can't put extensions on the house and stuff like that, which is really annoying for the residents, but it looks stunning. It looks like a sort of,
Amazing.
you know, like a little village. And as you say, this kind of utopian idea of the community and having everybody be able to live together is something that I think we need to maybe look back and think
I
about
think
more today.
I think we're lucky in Sussex because I think in all the kind of market research that we've done and kind of placemaking work, actually the communities are very strong. I mean, you've only got to look at things like the fireworks societies in Lewes and Battle and Haste, you know, those kinds of things. You know, I think some of the early work that we did on looking at the place in which we were was that kind of slightly wayward son or wayward daughter of communities. You know, they're slightly anarchic communities. And then as you were talking about Bloomsbury set earlier, you know, you've also got Roland Penrose at Farley's. I don't know whether you know Farley's Farm,
No,
but
no,
that's
not very
where
well. I've never lived in
um,
Sussex. Just love it.
so, you know, just a big shout out to Farley's, really. Please do have a look at their website. They're slightly challenging to get to, I think, in terms of sustainable transport. Um, but you know, that's the home of Roland Penrose and Lee Miller, that are actually one of the organisations that are still very authentic, and you can go and visit the house and their galleries, but they're touring internationally, right across the world. Lee Miller's work, and there's also a film coming out about Lee Miller as well in cinemas. So, you know, Farley's is as kind of has a similar look and feel to Charleston in a different way. But as you say, you've got that rich history of
Yeah.
artists. You've also got, you know, Mendelssohn and Jemiah in Bexhill, of course, the architects of the pavilion, who were fleeing. Mendelssohn was fleeing Hitler from Germany. Those kinds of things too. So you've just got this very rich community that already exists. I think the interesting thing about Sussex Modern was nobody told anybody about that. You know, it was a best kept secret. And I think everybody thought that the things like the transport links are really challenging. You know, I think East Sussex is the only county with no motorway in it.
Oh, is that why it's so
There's no
lovely?
motorway at all. So if you come, going back to the rural conversations, if you come, in a car, you will sit behind a tractor for 40
Yeah.
minutes.
Oh, that's
But
why it's so lovely. You always think, why do I love this place so much? And you've just nailed it because there's no
and
bloody.
that makes you slow down. You
I
know,
know.
that
Yeah.
you stop from driving 80 miles an hour to driving at 40 and just taking in your surroundings.
Oh, love it.
It's
Can we just, I'm so mindful of time. I know we've still got 20 minutes, but you know, so much to talk about.
good.
You talk about the best kept secrets of a place and how it sounds to me like you didn't know so much gold was there, and then you start to unpick it, and then suddenly all these incredible stories come out the wash. And I guess that's where my idea for Francis Fogel's story strategist came from. So coming from an art history background, I've really enjoyed geeking out in going to some of these places and sort of having this you know, sort of, it was my job to understand that these places came with such incredible history. And I think, as I say on my website, that a lot of places are sitting on a gold mine in terms of a story. And the thing that frustrates me a lot is these organizations that you're talking about, who are trying to get ahead, who are trying to diversify, who are trying to pivot to survive. You know, we're talking about sustainability in the environmental sense, but I'd like to turn the conversation to sustainability in terms of just your business surviving. And there are some people who would like to step away. There are founders and custodians who've got so enmeshed in this, and they don't want to be the only people in charge. But it's very difficult to let go when you haven't got a really robust business plan. You haven't got people around you buying into emotionally the thing. And the thing about stories is, if you've got one, then you can do so much with it. So you could pay a marketing and sales company to make you loads of money, and then pay another organization to kind of keep your people happy in terms of learning and development and employee rinky dinks and yoga at lunch and like benefits and child vouchers and whatever. And then you could pay another company to do UX and keep your customers loyal or retained, horrible terms in marketing. And then you could sort of chuck a bit of cash, a bit of charity stuff, and, you know, whatever, corporate sponsorship stuff. Or you could come up with one story and then pay 4 times less money and have that story underpin all of those 4 things. And everybody feels so much emotionally more aligned. So why wouldn't you do that? And that's why I kind of came up with it, because I thought, this is stupid. I'm seeing a lot of waste of time and people overlooking these wonderful histories, like pubs, the smugglers. Have you read Winchelsea? It's all about the smugglers around that coast, and it's just fascinating.
I think you're right. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me is very interesting with press. And we're very lucky to work with Sam Talbot at the moment, and I know many other organisations do in terms of arts PR. However, what you can see is if you get the story right and it is engaging to people, the press will carry itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back right to the beginning and Coastal Cultural Trail and just say you're not doing anything new. You're just telling a story of 3 venues and that you can cycle between the 3 of them. And how fun would that be? And stop at the pub on the way. And as long as you don't drink, cycle, it's okay.
Although you'll be behind a tractor, so you may be okay.
Yeah, or you might be being run over by the tractor on your bike. But so
We're
be
not
careful.
advocating drink cycling, everybody. Yes.
No,
Okay.
not with tractors around. But as I said earlier, it generated a lot of press, that story. I think Sussex Modern's also done that by, and again, we have had some help, but a lot of it is when you've got the story right, then either it will organically flow or it will make your PR's job that much easier or your comms team that much easier because the story's there. And I think that's I think that's really important. And I think you're right to pick up on that. The authenticity. I mean, again, it's a bit like us, let's not try to pretend to be a pretentious arts venue. We show some challenging visual art. We show some early and new career artists that are largely unknown. But part of our role is to expose new artists to the world and to help build careers of artists. So you can't show your Barbara Hepworths all the time that everybody knows and loves. It's about that diversity. But as long as you're authentic to that, and as long as you're unpretentious about it and you're welcoming, and the team are all playing the same message, hello, how are you today? That warm welcome and that, even with contemporary art of people going, I don't really get this or I don't really like it, and then engaging people and saying, oh, well, which bits do you like? Or tell me why you don't like it. And, you're engaging in a friendly, authentic conversation that is giving people an experience. And I think that's really important. And the same with the food. We know that, our food at the pavilion is really important. The same with the other institutions, the really nice new restaurant at Towner, it's a really lovely experience. Same with Charleston, etc. Community kitchen at Hastings Contemporary. The food is at the heart of the conversation, isn't it? Like when you sit down as a family around the table. And I think that's really important. And as you say, that then spreads in terms of that customer, those awful words like customer return rates, retention, all those kinds of things. If people like you, they will continue to come back and they feel comfortable and they buy into the story that you're telling.
I'd also like to go one step further and suggest that, so there's a great book by Seth Godin, who you'll probably know, Stewart, is the godfather of marketing. And I've got his This Is Marketing up there, which is his best known book, I would say. But his most recent book is called The Song of Significance. And it's about how to make your people, your customers, feel that they are part of this. It's not just that they buy into how lovely it is and they therefore support, trust, honor, and want to be loyal to, but they actually understand that without them the whole thing wouldn't exist. So I just want to touch on something that you were speaking about, authenticity. So the other thing I name drop here and there is that my mother is a group psychoanalytic therapist, and that I've been brought up with as I call it, psychotherapy as a second language. And the other thing that really pisses me off is that there's a lot of storytelling going on at the moment in the marketing world and the art world. And it's all about shiny, fabulous stories. And of course, underneath that is the shadow side. So let's go back to the farms. Perhaps your grandparents were doing as best they could and were very proud of everything that they were doing in turning this into a wonderful farm after the war. And now we're having to deal with that. There isn't enough money in the bank. There's debts. We want to tackle climate change. We could just be really shiny, or we could say, do you know what? We're not going to continue with what's been going on here. It was nobody's fault. We're not in a blame culture. But being where we are in the privileged position of sitting on land, which if we don't turn around, we're going to burn out and it's not sustainable financially. But also we have aspirations, but we're going to talk about the shadow shit. We're going to own that. And, you know, hopefully you'll buy into it. We're not for everyone. And that's okay, as Seth Godin would say. But we really want you to understand that we're now moving forward with, you know, we'd love to have more people coming here. So we're building a glamping site because we're trying to mitigate overseas travel. So come here, speak to our friends at Canopy and Stars, you know. We're doing a lot in the community. The community are buying into what we're doing. And in the world of corporate social responsibility, which is 20 years ago stuff, we're not giving them stuff in our sort of generous way. And they're not coming to us with their cap in hand. They are giving us what is making this vineyard or farm or pub what it actually should be. And so, do you know what I mean? Everybody feels involved in the story, and it's not just a branding exercise or a PR. And take Sam's brilliant storyline, but then make sure to put it underpin all these strategies instead of just, you know, the PR agents having to go off and just sell stuff and help you with the brand, but you not involving everyone else. What's the point?
No, I think you're right, and I think maybe this is a moment as well that a lot has changed since the pandemic. There's been a big shift as well. You know, as you say, not only changes with agriculture that's been happening for a long time, but actually changes. You know, I always say, you know, everything you know is wrong. You know, there's those moments where you kind of go. I mean, there's a lot of talk. I was in Birmingham recently, just looking at business models of other arts organisations, and we're just about to embark. We just announced architects for the refurbishment of the pavilion, and we're working on a kind of capital refurbishment. And there was a really brilliant session actually led by Arts Council in Birmingham, just talking about the challenges of business models and how you think you are going to evolve, how things, where projects started before the pandemic and when they've ended up post-pandemic, and actually they don't work at all, to do with working patterns and those kinds of things. So I think that thing that you're talking about, again, about not only being authentic with the story, but also being authentic if the story needs to change, and to say, well, actually, this isn't working anymore, and we need to do things differently. You know, a lot of us are partly funded by the local authorities. You know, what's happening to local authority funding, for example, what's happening to Arts Council funding. You know, everything is shifting. So that honesty with your community and your customers, I think, is really important. Even the price of a cup of coffee is really, you know, is really important, because we all know, you know, the cost of a flat white, right? In Middle England. And yeah, I just think that honesty is really important, and I totally agree with you. And I think this period is almost harder than the pandemic for a lot of people. So I think that agility and that, as you say, that sense of community, everybody working together, is really key. Not to be competitive, you know. You know, for instance, you know, the galleries and museums are slightly different, but actually we've always said we are not going to compete with each other. You know, the Turner Prize in Eastbourne, which is just coming to an end. It's last weekend, by the way. Get down and see it. has been a brilliant coming together of, it's not just Eastbourne's celebration or Joe Hill's and the team's
Yeah.
celebration at Towner. It's a celebration of us all working together and pushing communities and audiences around between us.
Yeah, and this is
And I
why the
think,
aggregators like Modern Sussex Modern are so important, because again, pooling resources is so important. The story's stronger, but also you needn't all then financially invest so much if you can come together and do things together and not compete, and the
and
story's
not
stronger anyway.
duplicate, can we share resources,
Yeah.
you know, on certain aspects? We're all working on skills programs at the moment. There's a big push for us to be working with young people to help them get into creative careers. So extending work experience, apprenticeships, those kinds of things. And it just makes sense for us all to be working together. I'm
It's actually
really,
really nice. You're reminding me when I worked at the Royal Academy 20 years ago in the corporate development department, and they were quite pioneering because they're a completely privately owned organisation. There's no government funding going to the Royal Academy of Arts, so they had to be very, very innovative and nimble. And I worked for an amazing person called Jo Arney, who I think is actually a mutual connection of ours. She's been head of
okay.
development at the V&A for a while, I think.
Oh, I
Um,
guess I know.
yeah, so Jo, I learned a lot from when she was head of corporate development at the Royal Academy. But I'm thinking about the patrons program, and they were really clever because they offered their patrons the chance to go to other galleries as well to have private views. And instead of kind of ring fencing and greedily kind of trying to hoard there's only a few very wealthy people who love art in this country. So they're going to be probably interested in the Serpentine, the V&A, whatever. So at all levels, we're talking about how it actually is pertinent to try to work together.
Yeah.
Particularly, and you started off by talking about government funding, and that's a whole other conversation, is how organizations can diversify their income, whether it's an arts organization or indeed a farm, and the whole thing of not relying too much on any one stream of revenue for the sake of sustainability and risk management makes sense. But we could go off on that, right? And that's not for today.
Just while you mentioned that, and excuse the plug, but just to say our patron scheme starts at just £250, which is very deliberate. So a lot of people pay like £20 a month. And that just gives you that kind of extra level of access. And there's always the ability for people to give more if they want to, but it's actually saying, we don't want this to be 1,000, we don't want this to be inaccessible. There's a membership scheme as well that's 40 or £60. But it's about keeping those things really accessible. And then, as you say, giving those opportunities to connect with other arts or institutions, either in the region or further afield.
And I'm curious to know, do you also then, in the spirit of what you were saying about everybody who's kind enough to be on the board of Sussex Modern, do you invite your patrons to volunteer how they could also, over and above the modest financial investment that they make as a patron, to kind of network, be of connection, use, in the spirit of everything that we're talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what's interesting at the moment, I don't know why, but there's a lot of interest from people like maybe to be trustees of the pavilion. And obviously there's only so many seats around the table, but what we're actually seeing is that people are providing in-kind support as well with, I've just started some kind of business mentoring with somebody who's got some fantastic global experience. So as you say, it's trying to use everybody to support that common cause as well, and use the skills where you can.
And I think probably everyone thinks they want to be a trustee because they don't quite know what else. And it's probably all quite unconscious as well. Like the ability to articulate all the other things you could also be that are of value over and above, or as much as being a trustee, because it just seems to be maybe a shortage of terminology to support how people in community can actually do things if they're not trustees. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, I think it's flattering, but as you say, you've got those other entry points, and we're always I need to be careful because, as you say, we're all busy, but in trying to have some open conversations with people, and say, well, actually, the first thing to do is to become a member or a patron. That would be really brilliant at whatever level, because that really builds that community. It also brings us a bit of revenue to support the charity. And then we try to include, for instance, with exhibition openings, we always have a members and patrons brunch where everybody comes together for a coffee and a croissant and then comes for a tour of the exhibitions. And that's a real moment to chat to everybody and to have those conversations, go, how can I help you? How can you help me? Those mutual conversations. It's really, really lovely. And they get, brilliant introduction from people like Joseph Constable, head of exhibitions, into the shows. You get that insight and you get to meet the artists into some of those shows that might be a bit more challenging, but they start to open the door to that world, and again start conversations.
I just want to make sure that I mention, because I've just remembered, and we're very much at time, Stewart. But the other thing that we really enjoyed when we were at the Delaware is it was a really lovely Patrick's Day arts and crafts workshop, which was completely free, completely just lovely and packed with families. No need to sign up before, you just turn up on the day. And I think you run them every couple of weeks, don't you?
Well, we normally run them, they're called Art Sundays. So they normally run on a Sunday, but of course we also run them in the holidays too, or there's activities that you can do.
And they're lovely. And I don't know if, because I haven't yet been sort of gone through the assessment for being on any kind of neurodivergent spectrum, but I think we're all another thing that's evolving is that what the hell is normal anymore. But I certainly personally sat down and went down an absolute creative rabbit hole, to the point that my husband and children were waiting for me to finish my snake, and I got really into it. And if
I
you
know
want to go to my,
it's the parents that are a problem at those sessions.
I mean, it was so fun, and there was glitter, and there was this, and there was that, and I just got really into it. And then had we had to have our photo taken with the lovely guy who ran the workshop, and I was so proud of myself. And he was like, "You've done very well." So it's not just for kids. And
No.
All joking aside, being able to use your hands and doing something creative, especially in the age of everyone on the screens all the time, is such a lovely thing to do with a backdrop of the ocean. I mean, it was, and we didn't spend a lot of money, did in the bookshop, but workshop free, sea free. So it's a great place to go, really.
Just quickly before we go, because I know we're out of time, but on the subject of neurodiverse, I just wanted to mention we're long-term partners with Project Artworks in Hastings, and also an organisation called Outside In that work with people with complex needs, to develop their skills as artists. And we've got a really amazing exhibition in the autumn by somebody called Michelle Roberts, who's a Bexhill artist, but part of that community. So I'd really encourage everybody to get that in their diaries. We also do quiet access times to the galleries as well, those kinds of things. So there's lots of activities going on our side for neurodivergence, for people with complex needs, to allow them to access the program or be part of it as well. So
have you got a community choir?
There's a big community gospel choir in Bexhill.
But do they use your amazing building?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And
Because
I think
the acoustics are sick. I would want to sing in there.
And they nearly blew the roof off.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh,
so
do you do a concert? Okay, anyway, we've got to go.
Yeah, don't forget the live music program.
Yeah.
Have a little look. Lots of lovely people coming up, like John Grant and Curtis Stigers.
Oh, wow, cool.
People like that. So do have a look at dlwp.com and have a look and see what's going on.
And I will also list out where you can find Stewart and DLWP and all the other things that we've talked about today. It's been such a pleasure. I'm so glad to have had this time with you. I know you are ridiculously busy. So thank you, Stewart. Really,
thank
really
you, Francis. Really great. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right. Take
everyone.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.